Do, 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 do.
Hello, welcome to Chet by Lightning.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
We are so excited to have you.
And for those who are not reading the show description yet, that is Scott Greenberger, the author of the definitive modern Chet biography, The Unexpected President, available anywhere you get your books or electronic versions thereof. And we're so excited to have an actual professional Chetologist on the show to talk all kinds of Chet things with us.
I double down on that excitement and greetings and welcome. And everybody should buy and read this book because it's super good and you'll understand why we love Chet so much by the time you're, I don't know, 3 chapters in.
Well,
So
thank you
welcome.
so much. That's kind of you.
Welcome.
So we will start this, I think, where we started this for ourselves, which is tell us how you came to Chet. Tell us about your Chet journey.
Okay. Well, I learned about Chet from Destiny of the Republic, ironically, I guess, which is the basis for Death by Lightning. I actually heard Candace Millard on Fresh Air, I think, talking about the book, and I thought it was intriguing. Went out, bought the book. First bought it for a friend of mine, and then he liked it, and then I read it, and I really enjoyed the book. I was struck by I think it's just several pages really on Arthur and his incredible transformation. And Candace Millard also mentions Julia Sand briefly, which was particularly intriguing to me. And I was a history major in college. I read a lot of American history. I knew virtually nothing about the Garfield story that is told in Destiny of the Republic. I knew absolutely nothing about Chester Arthur, except for the sideburns, of course. I remember there was a picture book of presidents my grandmother gave me when I was a kid, and I loved it. It only went up to Johnson, but the picture of the Chester Arthur was just so evocative to me, and I can see you have the picture behind you, Matt. I mean, there's no one else who has that kind of facial hair, and in fact, if people, for the most part, at least before Death by Lightning, if people know anything about Chester Arthur, they know about the facial hair, and that's about it.
We're also hoping that through this podcast, they will also learn that he had over 80 pairs of pants.
That's right. Yep. And that was in this picture book as well. The fact that I think it had the closet behind him with all the pants. So yes, he was quite a handsome man, considered to be quite a handsome man at the time, with both the way he dressed and his facial hair.
So as you kind of got into the Chet story, what surprised you most about his tale? What along his journey sort of really struck you as, this is something that's really interesting in a core way?
Well, I just think the whole narrative arc, and I think, you've referred to it also as sort of the 3 acts of his life. It's such an incredible story of redemption. He really did start out on a very different path. I think you've mentioned in an earlier podcast that the court case he was involved in that desegregated the New York City streetcars. Grew up in an abolitionist household. His father was very religious. He pretty quickly moved away from that, but he certainly started out his career as on the straight and narrow path, and also during the Civil War as quartermaster of the Union Army, where a lot of people were using their positions to enrich themselves. He had a position where he most certainly could have enriched himself, and he did not, at least not while he was in uniform serving as quartermaster of the Union Army. And then the fact that he eventually strayed down a different path, I think that was a function largely of the times. As a guy who wanted to be involved with politics, I mean, that was politics at the time for the most part, and he he jumped in with both feet. But I also loved the fact he's a colorful figure. I mean, what comes through from all the accounts is that he enjoyed eating and drinking. He enjoyed socializing. He enjoyed staying up really late and backslapping and telling stories. And that's one of the reasons he was so valuable to Roscoe Conkling, is that Conkling didn't like to do any of those things. He was a politician who did not like people. So Chester Arthur was the perfect lieutenant for him.
And it's a come up as a question before between me and Matt about whether or not that way of doing politics, that machine politics, was that seen as corrupt or was it just seen as, oh, the way things are? And then slowly, when people became dissatisfied with it, they began to think of it as corrupt. How do you think that played into it?
That's an interesting question. I mean, there was this reform wing of the Republican Party that emerged, pretty soon after the Civil War and around the same time that this way of politics emerged. And I think it's important to remember that this was sort of the beginning of this. It didn't really exist prior to this point, right? It was a function of the growth of the economy and the industrialization of the economy and people making tremendous sums of money and then trying to use that money and influence to work their will in state legislatures and in Congress. So it was all sort of new. I don't know. I think that, at some point fairly early in the development of this, that there were people who were saying, this is troubling. I don't like this. I mean, in talking about in my book, which I do, Thurlow Weed in New York was sort of a precursor of all this. And clearly there were people who objected because there are ample quotes of him defending this and saying, hey, this is the way the world works. This is the way to get things done. I've never, sure, I've pulled the levers, worked the levers in Albany, but I've never done that in service of anything that I didn't think was going to be to the benefit of the country. So there was, and again, with Roscoe Conkling, and I think you've noted this as well, and they, I'm not sure they really bring the sound death by lightning, but he was a machine politician through and through, but he was also a staunch abolitionist. He was a guy who was a very strong supporter of Reconstruction. He certainly he didn't hide what he was doing necessarily, or a lot of what he was doing. He was very open about it. He thought this was the way that things got done. This was politics.
That he was doing it in service of the values he believed in. So
Exactly.
what could
Right.
possibly go wrong?
Right.
Mhm,
Right.
mhm.
As you have had opportunity to talk about the book and sort of be a promoter of at least the story of Chet, it, is there anything in particular that seems to kind of jump out to people when you tell the story? This is something that either has current resonances or, oh my God, this is a tale that's kind of different than you hear in American history. Is there anything that's tended to strike people as you've had a chance to talk about him?
Well, when the book was first published in 2017, we had another unexpected president who was coming into office. And so the title was sort of a play on that. And at the time, a lot of people were interested in this idea of someone changing in office, uh, hopeful that Donald Trump coming in would somehow rise to the occasion, become a different person in office. I made a lot of the fact when I did that first book tour, the fact that Obama during that campaign had said something like, I don't remember the exact quote, but the gist of it was that the office doesn't change you, it magnifies who you are. And he was saying that to urge people to vote for Hillary Clinton. And yet, I think there still was what intrigued people about the Chester Arthur story at that point was, maybe here's a guy who came into office as one person and very quickly became a different person in office and sort of embraced the responsibility of being a president of all the people. So I think that interested people at the time. And then, of course, the Julia Sand aspect of it, I think, has always been fascinating to me and is just fascinating to everybody I've shared the story with. I mean, the idea that this young woman wrote these letters, that they had such an impact, that he saved the letters. It's just a fantastic story. And I don't think it really has I'm not aware of any parallel with any other president. So I think that really grabs people. And then more recently, during the second Trump administration, people have been very interested in the nuts and bolts of civil service reform and why do we have this system that we have, and what role did Chester Arthur play in at least laying the groundwork for a professional civil service. So I think depending on what's going on in the outside world, different parts of it have grabbed people. But I do think that just generally speaking, from a pure kind of entertainment point of view, the fact that there is this very clear narrative arc, almost as if it was fiction. I think that has really intrigued me and fascinated me, and I think people, if they're open to hearing the Chester Arthur story, they're fascinated by that as well.
Well, I might send a letter to Mike Makowski asking him to option The Unexpected President just so
Oh,
we can
please
get
do.
this
Thank you.
because it would
Yeah.
make I believe it would make such a compelling on-screen story, and the casting does itself at this point, the casting does itself. So,
Yeah, I've always thought it would be a terrific, back in when it first was published, I was trying to get it in the hands of Lin-Manuel Miranda. I think it would make a
oh
great
yeah.
music for it as well. Yeah,
It would. I mean, you could start it, I guess, with the Guiteau song and then go from there.
that's right. Yeah.
So, yeah.
So when word of this show came out, what were your hopes for it? Like, what were you like? Wow, I sure hope they captured this about Chet.
Well, I was wondering, first of all, how big a role he would play because I knew it was based on Destiny of the Republic, and in Destiny of the Republic, he does not play a very large role at all. So I was thrilled when it became clear that he was going to play a pretty big role, and Nick Offerman was just terrific. I mean, he is obviously over the top, and it's not there are parts of the performance that don't seem to conform to what I know about Arthur. At the same time, it's hard not to be amused and entertained by how he played the part, and I do think he gets the core of the Chester Arthur story is there, which is that even during the episodes before before Garfield dies, there are little hints, little breadcrumbs of, oh, well, I think Garfield says to him in one scene, which as far as I know, never happened, but Garfield says to him, I did a little looking into you and I know you were a different person and you did this, you were involved in this and you were involved in this uh, and then of course how upset Chester Arthur is when Garfield is shot in that final episode, and how almost loving he is, and when he lovingly is sort of turning Garfield over when Bliss is trying to dig around in there. None of which happened, by the way, but still, I think it is. It gives you some insight and an accurate insight into his character, that he was at his core kind of a good guy who had strayed in a direction with Conkling, but was poised to come back when the opportunity presented itself.
I mean, as a fan of Chester Arthur since 1997 and Die Hard with a Vengeance, had Chester A. Arthur Middle School.
That's right. That's the other thing people have heard of, by the way, when I mention it. Yeah.
And I was like, and Die Hard is my favorite movie, and so it's a whole thing. But it never occurred to me in my lifetime that I would get a representation of Chester Arthur on screen to any degree. And when they announced the show, I thought, even if it's just 10 minutes across the course of however many episodes it is, that will be 10 minutes more than I am likely to get for the rest of my life. And the fact that it was not 10 minutes, that it was a full-on feast of Chester Arthur,
It was a feast, yeah.
and that they managed to put his arc, they found a way to put his arc into the show almost in its entirety, in part by making the bad guys so bad at the beginning that they didn't have to explain very much,
Right.
right? And then and then having interactions that didn't happen, and putting Julia's words in Creed Garfield's mouth.
That was interesting. Yes. Yeah.
What did you think about that when
Yeah.
That was probably the part, since Julia Sand is not in it at all. That was the part that bothered me the most, but I understand why they did it, because if once they had made the decision not to put Julia Sand in there, I think it was important to his transformation to have someone say something like that. I mean, Lucretia Garfield, she plays a bigger role in Death by Lightning than she did and also there's the scene where she goes to talk to Guiteau in prison, which, as far as I know, never happened.
yeah, I'd be
Um,
shocked.
Yeah.
So, I understand the choice. Far be it for me to question Netflix. They know what they're doing, and the guys who produced it know what they're doing. And I think it worked as storytelling. If you didn't know that those words came from somebody else, then it wouldn't bother you so much.
Right.
Yeah.
If you weren't a Chet head.
Right. If
Yeah.
you're not a Chet head, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the official position of this podcast that the show deviates from history in many, many ways, all of which are justifiable by the story.
Yes, I think so.
Because on screen they're awesome.
Yeah.
So even with all the sort of Chet airtime we get, are there any of his virtues you'd like to kind of get on the record in the way the show did not? Like he was possibly the man with the best manners of the 19th century. Yeah. Anything else in the Chet story?
Well, that
then-
really did not come through at all.
Right.
You know, there's sort of, you know, when he yells out sausages and stuff, that was not, yeah, that was not accurate. Yeah, he was a, you know, again, he was considered, he was a widower at this point, considered to be extraordinarily handsome and with excellent manners, which at a time when that mattered a lot more than it does now. You know, he was a guy who told a great story. You know, he could, you know, he was a terrific host. He enjoyed the best food and wine, you know, and the most expensive food and wine. I'm not sure he was ever really a sausage guy necessarily. And I also wasn't, you know, he also reportedly really could hold his liquor. So that scene where he's sort of sloppy drunk doesn't fit either.
Multiple scenes where he's sloppy.
Yeah, I don't think, yeah, that doesn't ring true to me. The other part, and I know you all mentioned this, that doesn't ring true is Chet as kind of the muscle guy, where he's sitting there counting the cash while while they're roughing up some guy. That doesn't fit either. He was much more, what's the word I'm looking for? Not slick necessarily, but classy. I mean, there's a reason why the biography that Thomas Reeves wrote is called Gentleman Boss. He was a gentleman, first and foremost. So as entertaining as some of that stuff was in Death by Lightning, I don't think it fits with his character, what we know about his personality.
And for audio only audience, I'm holding up a copy of Gentleman Boss by Thomas Reeves.
Gentleman Boss, yeah. I mean, there's a lot in there. There was so much Chet in there.
So much.
Far more than Death to the Republic. It almost made me think that they were, and I was not consulted and I did not get any money for it, that they had another book that they were looking at as they did it. Because there were certain things in there that I know for sure, and I went back and looked, were not in Death to the Republic that were in my book. But again, I think that overall, they did a terrific job. It was sort of surprising, also given how Destiny of the Republic is laid out, that Alexander Graham Bell plays a very minor role in Death by Lightning, a much more important role in Destiny of the Republic. And also, as I think you all noted, the fact that Garfield isn't even shot till the final episode of Death by Lightning, whereas Destiny of the Republic, most of the book is him lingering on what would be his deathbed, and all of these various, attempts to, bring in the air conditioning. They actually allude to that Death by Lightning, kind of like the first air conditioning, moving him around, all this stuff. Yeah, that's a good part of Destiny of the Republic, and it's not really a big part of Death by Lightning. Yeah.
Yeah, we were saying that the show could have been 4 hours of pus.
Yeah,
they made a good
decision
not to do that.
Yeah, probably better. Yeah, better in book version.
Just the amount we saw was a little too much for me. So I'm very grateful they took it in a different direction. That I will say the showrunner, Mike Bukowski, was very clear that once he started digging into the story, Destiny of the Republic, he became very interested in Chet's story. So
Oh, really? Did you?
Yes.
I didn't read that.
there was an interview with him where he said that he thought that Chester Arthur's story was very surprising and very interesting to him, and he did more research on that. So I have a sneaking suspicion that your sneaking suspicion about source material for him is probably correct.
Yeah. Well, if he wants to do a sequel, I knows he can reach me. Yeah.
Yeah, we refer to it as the RBCU, the Republican Bearded Cinematic Universe.
That's right.
Here.
That's right. I don't know where do you go from there though?
Yeah.
To those two, I'm not sure.
So being extremely greedy, we got so much Chet in the show, more than I think any of us expected. There are a couple of really dramatic scenes from Chet's life that could have been in the show and weren't, and I thought would have been dramatically interesting. So I'm just going to have you talk about a couple of them. One is there is the showdown during the campaign between the Conkling and Garfield camps about just how much corruption Garfield's going to allow in his presidency. Just walk us through that a little bit,
Right.
because it feels like that could have been a fun showdown.
Although Arthur was not there for that meeting, was he the one at the Fifth Avenue Hotel? I'm not sure about that, where these promises were made supposedly or not.
Well, given how poor the
Everyone else was there, though, I think.
yeah, given that no one can agree with that what happened at this, probably Arthur wasn't there.
Yeah.
But I think that would have been, certainly giving Michael Shannon and Shea Wiggum a chance to really go at each other.
Yes,
I think
I
would have
think that
been
would have been interesting. I think that, I opened my book with the prologue is the steamship from Albany arriving in New York, and that's where Conkling and Arthur both learned that Garfield had been shot. In Death by Lightning, of course, they're in a carriage coming back from Albany to Washington, which is strange. And then Arthur gets out and he claims he's going to walk, and
I will not ride with you any longer.
right. And then he shows up and he claims he's been riding, and like people's hitching rides on farm wagons and stuff. I thought it would have been a lot better. I thought the fact that how I started my book, where they find out when they first dock in New York and they hear it, and Arthur literally just collapses in disbelief. I think that would have been interesting. And then also right after that, when they go to the Fifth Avenue Hotel and they're looking for any news of what's happened in the scene there, I think was very interesting. And also everyone in the streets of New York waiting for any news of what's been happening. None of that was in there, which I think is interesting. They just had him. I think the reaction, the people's reaction to it was missing, which I think was very dramatic.
Right, because it did have such an impact on the American people.
Yes.
Both, because they're devoted to the president in general and the idea of the presidency, and to some extent Garfield, and also, as Julia Sand notes in some of her letters, and they were all just super scared, Chester A. Arthur, that you were about to become the president of the United States. Everybody was dreading this possibility.
Yeah, if it had been a Chester Arthur focused show, which I know the three of us would like it to have been, you could have seen the headline, those headlines where many newspapers were suggesting not only that it was a disaster, but that somehow Conkling and Arthur had something to do with it. And you have some hints of that in Death by Lightning, but I guess they could have gone a little further with that. Let's see, what are some other very dramatic episodes?
I think the Delmonico's dinner.
Oh yes, you mentioned, yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's a great one, where he basically admits that the fix was in. They were handing out money. Yeah, that's a great scene, and I make a big deal of that in my book as well, because that's a terrific scene. One of the great things about this period of history, and I think Candace Millard benefited from it, and I know I certainly did, is that because the story takes place in New York, and this was the golden age of newspapers. There were so many newspapers, and because it was before TV and radio, the articles were so descriptive. People had never seen these people, and so the reporters felt obligated to say, oh, he was wearing this coat and he's wearing this, this particular hat. And so for someone from the 21st century coming back and trying to recreate that and bring 21st century people into it, it was really easy to do that. Because and this is all available online, the New York Sun, the New York Times, the New York Herald. It's just, and they all, they have slightly different takes on whatever they're describing, but together you can get a pretty good picture of what a particular scene was like, which is just invaluable for a writer.
So one thing I just think also not quite as dramatic, but what was Arthur's daily life like as vice president? Obviously he was in Albany for the fight at some point. They have him kind of hanging around the White House in ways that may not have been quite historic.
That was not true. Yeah, he was not hanging around he wasn't hanging around the White House before Garfield was shot, and he was not hanging around the White House after Garfield was shot, because in the latter case, he and Conkling were very concerned, given the suspicions that they did not want to be perceived as being in a hurry to fill the dead man's shoes. So Arthur stayed he stayed in New York. He did not want to be. He came to Washington once, I think, just to kind of, visit the Garfields and express his concern. But then he went back to New York. He did not hang around Washington. And as vice president, uh, you know, even now the vice presidency, well, in some recent presidencies, the vice president has become somewhat prominent, probably from Cheney, who just died. Maybe Gore before that, but famously, I think it was LBJ who called it, it's not worth a warm bucket of spit or something. The vice president doesn't do anything. So I think the idea that Arthur was hanging around the White House actually doing anything is probably unlikely. Although I think in Death by Lightning, they show him around the White House, but not doing very much,
Not
right?
doing
He just kind of
anything.
kicked back with his feet on the desk and not doing anything. Yes.
And there is that scene where somebody says to him, what do you, I think it was Garfield, like, what are you going to do with your duties? And he says, I'm the vice president. I wasn't aware there were any.
That's right. Exactly right.
Yeah.
I don't think he was. Yeah, he wasn't doing
Yeah.
much at all. Yeah.
Ah, bless his heart. Yeah.
So one other thing is, the show, I think, probably gets this right, um, at some substantive level, but just kind of specifically, what do we know about whatever Garfield Guteau interactions there might have been? I assume I generally describe Charles Guteau as the most annoying man of the 19th century. So I assume no one had a lot of tolerance for him, let alone Chet. But like, what do we know about how those two might have crossed paths?
Did you meet
Well-
Garfield and Guteau or Chester A. Arthur and Guteau?
Both, to be honest.
Both. Yeah.
Oh, well, I think Chester Arthur and Guteau might have crossed paths at the campaign headquarters, right? Because Arthur did, play an active role in the campaign, and Guteau presented himself there and offered to do whatever, and I guess apparently did make some sort of a speech or two. As for the Garfield and Guteau interactions, there was they show Guteau sitting in Lafayette Square, in Lafayette Park across from the White House, and that is true. He did go to his church one time, I believe. I don't have it in my book, but I think that's in Candace Millard's book. I don't think, and there was, of course, that scene, which seems incredible to us today, but by all accounts is pretty accurate, of people literally lining up to talk to the president to get jobs. I think that is accurate, and that Guteau was one of those people. So I don't know if he, in Death by Lightning, they have him sort of sitting down with Garfield and kind of having a bit of a discussion. I don't know if that happened, but apparently Guteau did go to the White House with many others looking for a job, and he did have an interaction with Blaine where he, had asked about the consulship or ambassadorship to Paris or Vienna. So all of that is fundamentally accurate, as strange as it seems to us today.
To have that much access.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I'd say about Guteau, though, that's different from Death by Lightning, is that you describe him as the most annoying person. And certainly he comes across that way in Death by Lightning. He's more sinister in reality, I think. There's, he was married, which they don't mention. He locked his wife in a closet, eventually got divorced. When he was staying at his sister's house, he dropped a puppy down the stairs, and the puppy broke its leg. I mean, there's some stuff that's a little more disturbing than just him being annoying. And then, of course, the other thing that is not included, which would have been very dramatic, is the shipwreck that he survived,
Oh,
which convinced him once and for all that he was, fated for some
touched
great
by
beat.
God.
Yeah. I was sort of surprised that wasn't in there, honestly.
One of the things that's happening in the background of all of this, this Act 2 part of Chester's life, is that 5 months before the convention, Nell Arthur dies.
Yeah.
And he is grieving when he's making all these decisions, and he essentially grieves for the rest of his life. There's the Nell Arthur window at St. John's Church, which Matt and I have seen. I'm sure you've seen as well. You describe in the book how he had flowers around her picture next to his
Yeah.
bedside, fresh flowers every day.
Yeah.
What role do you think Nell played in his life, I guess in Act 1, but also what role do you think being a widower played in the rest of his life?
Well, it's a complicated question. He does in Death by Lightning make reference to the fact that she was a Confederate sympathizer. So that's an interesting little part of it, that after he left, resigned as quartermaster, he was a bit of a copperhead. He wasn't. He had sort of strayed also maybe under her influence from being so pro Lincoln. So there's that element. I think also she was a person who was a sort of a high society person who wanted, and I hesitate to blame it on her because he was also, but I think together they wanted to make some money and be prominent in New York. And being prominent in New York meant having money. And so it made sense then that he would go into, in essence, lobbying and try to make as much money as he could once he left government service, which certainly happens today. So there's that influence. I think at the same time, though, as we think about what he was doing as he became more and more involved with the machine, a lot of his job was hanging out late at night, drinking and smoking cigars, going out to questionable resorts, as Silas Burt said, and that's portrayed also in Death by Lightning. I think, there's even some hints in the record of of Nell being alone a lot because he was always out. That when she went to the opera or something, she was accompanied by some older gentleman or someone else because Chester wasn't around. So when she died, and in fact, when she died, he was up in Albany. So I think that he felt, when she did die, I think he felt some amount of guilt, about the fact that his activities, had taken him away from her, in addition to being, somewhat sketchy. And so I think that, in addition to the letters from Julia Sand and watching Garfield suffer and his family suffer, I think all of these things together, contributed to, what would be his remarkable transformation. So I think that he did carry, um, her with him, after she died. The other scene that I, described in my book, when when he comes back to New York after the convention, he's been named vice president, and there's a celebratory dinner, and I think his daughter comes in with some flowers, and he makes some comment about how, well, none of these honors really mean as much to me as they, mean much to me anymore now that Nell's not here to share them with me. So I think that he missed her dearly. And as you noted, it wasn't, she had not been gone very long when all of these events, transpired.
Yeah. Which I think might be a night because Julia Sand, we could do an entire episode about
Yeah.
Julia Sand if we wanted to. It's just such an engaging personage. And what captured your imagination? What about her captured your imagination when you were reading the story of Chester A. Arthur? And where, how did that deepen for you as you were doing the research into the book and reading all those letters? I have so many questions. I'll just start with those two.
Okay. Well, I mean, first of all, just the very, as I mentioned, it's in Destiny of the Republic, just very briefly, just the fact that she just sort of mentions and then moves on. Oh, and by the way, there was this mysterious pen pal, this young woman in New York who wrote him these letters urging him to be a better person. And lo and behold, he was. And then that was the end, so just the fact of Julia Sand and her role was fascinating to me. And that really got me into the story. In fact, when I first conceived of the book, I thought I would write it really just all about that it wouldn't be as much of a traditional biography. And then my editor said, you know what, I think we need more. That's not enough. We need to sort of show the whole arc, which I think of his life, which was the right call. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if you were Lincoln and everybody knew about him already, you could do something
Right.
about the woman who wrote him letters.
Yeah.
But it's hard to do something about Julia Sand being catalyst to this transformation that people are like, "What transformation?
Yeah.
Who are you
Exactly.
talking
Yeah.
about?"
It didn't make sense to just focus too narrowly on that. Um, but the fact that a few things about her. First of all, she had sort of these mysterious kind of Victorian ailments, right? It's not clear what exactly is going on, though. Why is she stuck at home? Is her back hurt, or I don't know what's going on.
What was it? Yeah.
It's not clear what it was. So there's that. The fact that she also she had lost a brother in the war, like many Americans had lost loved ones in the war. So there's that element. The fact that she's I hesitate to say a spinster because she was a very young woman by today's standards, but she's living with her brother. She is, because of these ailments, sort of frustrated socially, it seems like, and frustrated certainly because she is a person who knows a lot about politics and follows it very closely, and yet because she's a woman, she can't participate in any meaningful, way. She can't even vote, let alone run for office. So, all of that is appealing, but most of all, first and foremost, the letters themselves are so wonderful. I mean, she is such a wonderful, engaging writer, and she's funny, and the way she teases him about things. The letters themselves are just extraordinary. And she also has great handwriting, so it's easy to read the letters. They're just so entertaining. They're just so entertaining and modern. Um, and uh, and so all of those things together, and I think the mystery of her also, and I've found out a little more about her since I wrote the book, and I guess there's some evidence that's emerged that she eventually had some lover who maybe drowned, and she was so distraught that she ended up in some sort of a mental institution for part of her life. It's very shrouded in mystery, which I think adds to the fascination of her. No one really knows much about her. She
So
had
Victorian.
this nephew who came forward later when someone put out an appeal, to figure out where these letters had come from. And so I think I'm forgetting the details, and there was a nephew in Florida who kind of remembered sitting around the table and talking about politics with his aunt Julia.
Yes, tariffs, talking a
Yeah,
lot about
talking about
tariffs.
tariffs. Yeah. So just everything about her is fascinating. And then the one picture that we have of her also, where she seems I mean, she's very attractive and kind of I don't know. She's a mystery woman, and we also don't know whether he ever wrote back to her. We don't. There's no evidence that he did. Um,
And
but
by the number of times she complains in her letters that he hasn't written her back,
yes, yeah, we've
if he
seen
did,
that.
it was late in the correspondence.
That's right, right. So I don't know. The visit, you alluded to it earlier, where she has like this, where she describes this elaborate daydream where he sent her flowers and everything. She's just a wonderful character, just an interesting um, character who's very much of her time and place, but at the same time expresses herself in a way that's very modern and relatable, I think.
Yeah, Betsy and I had a running joke about how she was secretly a ninja. And then we encountered the part in the letters where she said she was in touch with public opinion because she rides around at night on her broomstick. Like we were closer than we realized.
Closer than we realized.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, and she goes to Newport, right, looking for,
Yep.
hoping to run into him, and running into his son instead. Um, yeah, it's just, it's just a wonderful story. The whole story is just you couldn't if if you wrote it as fiction, I think people would think it was far-fetched.
She was so of her time, but she was also kind of out of time, both, as you say, in the modernity of her language,
Mhm.
in the temerity she had in writing the president multiple
Yeah.
letters in the first place, and in beseeching him to come and meet with her, just come hang out with me. All of that was just, she's just out of time.
Yeah.
I am a Julia Sand fan,
Oh, me too, me too.
as you might have noticed. Yeah, she's very, just an interesting personage, and what do you make of the fact that those letters survived the great post-death paper purge of Chester, his decision that he
Yeah.
didn't want his record to remain, and yet there was a careful packet of her letters survived all that. What do you think about that?
Well, to me, and I know there are people who disagree with this, but to me, that is the clearest evidence, that and the visit, of course, that these letters really were meaningful to Arthur, that they really had an impact. It as you note, he burned a lot right before he died, or ordered that it be burned, and he clearly wanted to save these letters. And not only from the burning, but he saved them as they were being written all along, right? 23 letters. So I think that's very clear evidence that they meant a lot to him. And he, the other thing about her is that, we know about the arc of Chester Arthur's story. She knew a little bit from the papers, but wow, the insight she has into his state of mind during that time. If you can, if if you consider how people around him described how he was as Garfield was on his deathbed, she wasn't around him. She didn't know that. She was housebound in New York, and yet she had this incredible ability to sort of look inside his soul and know exactly what was going on in his head. And I like to think that's why he saved those letters and why they were so meaningful to him, is that, it must have really struck him to read these things, to open it up and read a letter from a woman he'd never met, who seems to somehow understand exactly how he's feeling.
Listen,
It's really something.
I governed for 12 years. I was a mayor for 4 years. If I had gotten some correspondence from anybody that I didn't know saying, this must be what it's like for you right now, and it was accurate, because people did that all the time inaccurately, but it was accurate,
Yeah.
I would have saved those as well.
Yeah.
I would have saved those as well, and maybe asked them to host a house party, but
Right, and to contribute, right.
Yeah, right, right. Okay, so I have 3 moments in Garfield's life, not Garfield's life, in Chester A. Arthur's life, and I'm gonna ask you, if you're willing, to rank them 1, 2, 3. If you had a time machine, which one would you wanna be at most,
Oh,
and then
wow.
second most and third most, okay?
Okay. All right, let me think.
So,
Okay.
one of them is, and I think this did happen, but I have an alternative if you tell me it did not, that Chester did go to Garfield's bedside at least once while he was
Once.
ill.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that would be one. Would you wanna be there to witness Chester at Garfield's bedside?
Right.
2, um, one of the meetings that happens between Chester and Conkling when the rift is really happening after he becomes president,
Mm-hmm.
or I guess it would be before that. Like, maybe when he finds out that Chester's actually gonna take the vice presidency. Whenever Roscoe Conkling's gonna be most mad in
Most
person,
belligerent.
yes,
Right.
at Chester Arthur, that would be number 2, and number 3, when Chester goes to Julia Sand's house and they have their hour-long, awkward conversation.
Yeah.
Rank those 3
That's
in
tough.
order. I
Well,
know.
definitely, should I go last to first?
Yes, go last to
Sure.
first.
I don't want to be at Garfield's bedside. The pus,
Yeah.
I don't,
The smell alone
the
would
smell, the heat. I don't have no desire to be there. So let's knock that one out right
Great.
away. The other 2 are tough. I'm gonna say one of the things about Death by Lightning that bugged me a little bit was, and I don't remember the actor's name, and I guess he did a good job, but I think he was miscast as Conkling. Conkling was big and athletic and towering and intimidating, and that actor was not any of those things. Now, having said that, I think Roscoe Conkling is an absolutely fascinating and entertaining
Yes.
figure in his own
Agreed.
right. So I would love to have met him, and I would have loved to have been in the room when he was angry, especially because he had a way with words, and I'm sure he really let Chet have it. But I've got to make that number 2, because being in the room when Chester Arthur shows up to talk to Julia has to be number 1 for me, for all the reasons
So-
I talked about with Julia. Yeah.
Your order is my order.
Yeah.
See,
Absolutely.
I'd put that last because I just don't have that level of tolerance for cringe. Like it's like 2 people I love having a profoundly awkward interaction because neither of them was really prepared for it. Were really prepared for it.
Yeah.
That just sounds excruciating to me, and I love them both, and I wish they had some. I wish she got her second visit where she could have prepped herself a little better.
Yeah. Well, I just
So-
think it would have been so fascinating to see how they interacted, to see, because that's how you could gain some insight into how he really felt about her,
Yeah.
how she really felt about him.
And how much of a crush there was on either side.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, she definitely had a crush on him.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
But I've often wondered if he had a little tundra for her as well, but perhaps meeting her in person doused it a little bit.
Maybe with all of her family members.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and she complains in the letter, "If you had come at any other time, I would have been here by myself, but no, you can't."
You had to come when my whole family was here.
Yeah, some
Matt,
people.
I will just say, Matt, I'm very glad you weren't there when I met Ralph Macchio because you could not have handled how awkward I was in
Did you have the same sort of thing for Ralph Macchio?
Well, when I was a kid, he was my first celebrity crush, and then when I was mayor, I found myself, at a conference, a Comic-Con thing that he was at, and I didn't know he was gonna be there. This was in Minneapolis, and I was being led around meeting all the people who were there, and somebody said, "Would you like to meet Ralph Macchio?" And the first words out of my mouth were, "Ralph Macchio is not here." And I freaked out so badly that they were like, "You do not have to meet him." And it just went from there.
What have you been watching? What's the Karate Kid? Yeah, Cobra Kai. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, I am a lifelong Ralph Macchio stan. I no longer have that crush on him, but he was very, very kind to me when I met him. Much like
Always
Chester
nice when
Arthur
you
was
meet
kind.
people that you really admire, and they end up being friendly, and yeah, it's a nice thing.
He's got a great reputation for that. So,
So, looks like we're probably not getting the Republican bearded cinematic universe the way we might hope. There are other parts of this tale, obviously, as things go on. Chet too had kind of a dilettante life. Gavin Arthur, the grandson, we talked about him a little bit. He had some adventures. I don't suppose in your research that you actually have taken possession of his book about sex horoscopes or whatever.
No,
Brilliant.
I didn't know that existed. No.
oh yeah.
Yeah, as part of his weird sex theory thing, he had a whole thing about how your sexual type corresponds to your zodiac sign, and he
Interesting.
expounded on that at book length,
Wow.
which I've not tried too hard to get, but I imagine is
Yeah. No, I wasn't
wild.
aware of that.
I would like that book. So if there's anybody out there in the listening in the Chetaverse who has access to that book or someone, where I could look at it, maybe the Library of Congress has it, let me know.
So I think two parts here. One, he's heard it from us, or people we've sent it out as us. Scott, if you want to make the Nick Offerman appeal this show, we'd appreciate it.
Nick, I know you gained weight for this role. You wore the fat suit. You grew out the facial hair. It seems what a waste to just use all that once. Let's do it again. There's this whole other story. It's a sequel, kind of, although I think the beginning would be sort of the parallel story at the same time, and through Chet's eyes, and I think it would be absolutely fascinating. It's an untold story. And Julia Sand not appearing at all in Death by Lightning. That's just a wasted opportunity.
Here's a big chance. And if Mr. Offerman, we would like him to listen to this podcast so that he hears your plea. And so if anybody knows Nick Offerman or knows someone who does know Nick Offerman, every show we say, the goal of this was to have at least 11 people listen, including me and Matt. We would like one of them to be Nick Offerman, and even more, we would like him on our pod because we are America's #1 Chester A. Arthur podcast.
Absolutely.
And for people who can't get enough, who are leaving unsated by Death by Lightning and by Chet by Lightning, there's a book they can read by our guest here. Why don't you tell people all about it?
Yeah, so my book is The Unexpected President. It tells you the full story of Chester Arthur, includes some of what you saw in Death by Lightning, but the Chester Arthur portion of that story is even more fascinating and more interesting than what you saw on Netflix, in my opinion.
Everyone go buy it.
Go buy the book and read it. It's really good.
Betsy, I think it's time for the fanfare.
It's time for the fanfare. Do, 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 do. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much, Scott Greenberger, for being our guest.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you so much for having me. It was a blast. Take
Bye,
care.
everybody.